The clink of her daughter's fork against the porcelain plate was a small, perfect sound in the symphony of the restaurant. Imani watched Brielle carefully maneuver a piece of glazed carrot, her small face a mask of concentration. The light from the crystal chandelier overhead caught the metallic threads in Brielle's pale pink dress, making her shimmer like a fairy princess. It was her 7th birthday, and Imani had saved for 3 months for this single meal at Solis, the most exclusive restaurant in Seoul, a place where reservations were a form of currency. Imani smoothed the dark purple silk of her own dress, a single indulgence she'd allowed herself. She was an English tutor for the children of the city's wealthiest families, a position that gave her a window into a world of casual opulence she could never inhabit. Tonight, for Brielle, she was pretending. A subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere pulled her attention to the entrance. A man stood there, framed by the grand doorway. He was not loud or ostentatious, but the room seemed to bend toward him, the low hum of conversation faltering for a half-beat. He was dressed in a suit of such a deep charcoal gray it was almost black, tailored with a precision that spoke of astronomical cost. It wasn't the suit that held her gaze, though. It was the stillness. He moved like the world owed him space, and the world, it seemed, agreed. The maitre d', a man who exuded an impenetrable wall of professional calm, was visibly flustered. His hands fluttered. His smile was strained. Imani couldn't hear the words, but she could read the choreography of apology and rejection. The man's posture remained unchanged, but a flicker of something passed over his features. It wasn't anger. It was quieter, more profound. A deep, resonant disappointment that felt strangely familiar to her. "He looks sad, Mommy," Brielle whispered, her carrot forgotten. "Like when my balloon flew away." Imani's heart gave a small, painful squeeze. She saw it too. Beneath the bespoke armor and the cold, expensive watch on his wrist, there was a man who looked lonely. He gave a single, sharp nod to the maitre d', a gesture of dismissal, and turned to leave. The powerful shoulders, which had seemed to hold up the room moments before, looked heavy. It was an impulse, foolish and immediate. Imani was not a woman given to impulse. She survived through careful planning and quiet observation. But seeing that solitary figure about to walk out into the night on what was clearly a special occasion for him, the maitre d' had mentioned a birthday in his hushed, apologetic tones, struck a chord deep within her. It was the same chord that had vibrated with loneliness on too many of her own birthdays celebrated quietly after her daughter was asleep. Before her rational mind could stop her, she stood up. The purple silk of her dress whispered in the quiet room. But it was Brielle who gave the impulsive voice. "Mister," she called out, her voice clear and high. "You can sit with us. We have room." Every head in the restaurant turned, first to Brielle, then to Imani, and finally to the man at the door. He froze, his hand on the ornate brass handle. He turned slowly, his eyes, dark, intelligent, and utterly unreadable, finding them across the expensive, cavernous space. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The maitre d' looked as if he might faint. The man's gaze fell on Imani. It was not a casual glance. It was an assessment, sharp and thorough, as if he were memorizing the lines of her face, the defiant set of her jaw, the way her hand rested protectively on her daughter's shoulder. She met his gaze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, refusing to look away. This was a mistake. A colossal, beautiful, terrifying mistake. He took his hand off the door. He walked toward their table, each step silent and deliberate on the plush carpet. He didn't look at the other diners, who were now pretending not to stare. He looked only at her. As he arrived, the scent of his cologne reached her, a clean, sharp note of cedar and something else, something like cold night air. He stopped beside their table, a towering, silent presence. "There's room?" he asked. His voice was a low baritone, deeper than she'd expected, with a smooth, velvety texture that did nothing to calm her nerves. Imani swallowed. "Yes," she managed, her own voice sounding thin to her ears. "My daughter is insistent." He looked at Brielle, who beamed at him. "It's my birthday dinner," she announced proudly, "but we can share it." A ghost of a smile touched the man's lips, a fleeting expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. It is my birthday as well. He slid into the empty chair opposite them. The space between them, once empty, was now filled with a tension so thick Imani felt she could taste it. He placed his hands on the white linen tablecloth, fingers laced together. They were elegant hands, long and lean, but there was a power in their stillness, a hint of lethality that a lifetime of tailored suits couldn't quite conceal. That was the moment everything changed. The moment a simple dinner became a contract signed in silence, under the glittering, unblinking eyes of a crystal chandelier. The waiter, who had been hovering like a nervous bird, descended upon them. The man, he hadn't offered a name, and Imani didn't dare ask, ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than her monthly rent without glancing at the menu. He ordered it with a quiet authority that left no room for argument. The meal began in a strange, stilted silence. Imani was acutely aware of his presence, the way he held his fork, the way his dark eyes missed nothing. He ate with an economy of motion that was both graceful and unnerving. He was surprisingly gentle with Brielle, however. He listened to her rambling stories about school and her best friend with a focused attention that most adults lacked. "Do you have a little girl?" Brielle asked, her mouth full of creme brulee. Imani shot her a warning look. "Brielle, that's not polite." "It's a fair question," the man said, his voice soft. He looked at Brielle, and for the first time, the coldness in his eyes seemed to recede, replaced by a deep, ancient sadness.
"No.
"I do not. I had a sister once. A younger sister." The past tense hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. "Did she like cake?" Brielle pressed, oblivious to the shift in tone. "She loved it," he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted in that phantom smile again. "We always had a strawberry cake for our birthdays. They are one day apart." Imani saw the wound then. It was not a fresh cut, but a deep, foundational scar that had shaped the man he had become. A woman he was supposed to protect, a sister, a loss that had clearly defined him. She felt a pang of empathy, so sharp it surprised her. Her thoughts were shattered by a new presence at the far side of the room. For men had entered. They were not dressed for Solis. Their suits were cheaper, their posture aggressive. They stood near the bar, their eyes scanning the room until they landed on their table. On him. The change in her companion was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment, he was a man lost in a sad memory. The next, he was a predator. His body didn't move, but the energy around him solidified, turning sharp and cold. His hand, which had been resting near his wine glass, moved to lie flat on the table, palm down. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the unsheathing of a blade. The air grew thick with unspoken menace. The other diners felt it too, their laughter and conversation dying down into nervous murmurs. The leader of the new group, a man with a jagged scar bisecting his eyebrow, gave a slight, mocking bow in their direction. It was a challenge, a message, and it was delivered in a room where a woman and a child were present. An unforgivable breach of a code she didn't understand. The man across from her, her strange birthday guest, didn't acknowledge them. He took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes fixed on Imani. "Finish your dessert, Brielle," he said, his voice dangerously calm. The four men lingered for another moment, then turned and left as abruptly as they had arrived. The restaurant exhaled a collective sigh of relief, but the spell of the evening was broken. The maitre d' was pale, whispering frantically into a phone. As if on cue, two men who Imani hadn't even noticed before materialized from a corner table and the bar, flanking their position at a discreet distance. His soldiers. They had been here the whole time. Her guest placed a thick stack of bills on the table, more than enough to cover the meal and the terror he had brought with him. He looked at Imani, his face an impassive mask once more. "My driver will see you and your daughter home safely," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. A way to cut the cord, to erase the mistake of letting an outsider into his orbit. She could have taken it. She could have grabbed Brielle, hurried out into the night, and tried to forget this entire bizarre, frightening evening. It was the sane and logical thing to do. But looking at him, she saw the rivals' eyes on her and Brielle. They hadn't just seen him. They had seen them. Leaving now didn't feel like an escape. It felt like walking out into an open field with a target on her back. Paradoxically, the most dangerous place in Seoul, right next to this man, suddenly felt like the safest. She met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. Brielle isn't finished with her birthday cake, Imani said, her voice steady. She picked up her own fork. And neither am I. Surprise flickered in his dark eyes. It was the first genuine emotion she had seen in him that wasn't tied to his past. He watched her take a deliberate bite of cake, her hand not trembling. He saw her choice. She wasn't running. She was staying. A slow, dangerous smile finally touched his lips, and this time, it reached his eyes. It was not a kind smile. It was a smile of possession, of recognition.
Very well, he said.
Let's finish the cake. He didn't take her home. There was no taxi, no discussion. After the last bite of cake was eaten and Brielle was beginning to droop with sleep, he led them out a private rear exit to a black sedan with tinted windows so dark they were opaque. One of his silent soldiers held the door. My name, he said, as the car pulled smoothly into the neon-lit streets of Seoul, is Kwon Jae-hyun. He said it like he was giving her a weapon. Or a key. She wasn't sure which. Imani, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Brielle was a warm, sleeping weight between them. The space in the back of the car felt impossibly small. His shoulder brushed hers as the car took a sharp turn, and an electric jolt shot through her. He looked at her, then at her sleeping daughter. Imani, he repeated, testing the sound of it. He said her name differently than anyone else had. Not with the polite distance of her clients or the casual affection of friends she no longer had. He said it like it was a secret he had just discovered, a piece of territory he intended to claim. The car didn't head toward her modest apartment complex. It glided toward the Han River, stopping before a sleek, imposing skyscraper of glass and steel. This was not a detour, it was a destination. It is not safe for you to go home, Jae-hyun stated, as if discussing the weather. They were escorted through a private lobby into an elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment. The view was breathtaking, the entire city spread out below them like a carpet of scattered jewels. But Imani felt like a bird in a gilded cage. Her old life felt a million miles away, a distant dream. The danger that had been a fleeting shadow in the restaurant was now a concrete reality. He had brought the storm to her doorstep, and now he had locked the door behind them. The next morning, the first blow landed. Her phone buzzed with a message from her employer, the head of the tutoring agency. Her contract was terminated, effective immediately. No explanation was given, but none was needed. Someone had made a call. A threat, veiled but potent, had been delivered. Her livelihood, the carefully constructed pillar of her independence, was gone. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the city that had just rejected her, when Jae-hyun found her. He didn't have to ask what was wrong. He knew. He had known this would happen. This is what you do, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. You touch things and they break. He stood beside her, not touching, but his presence was a heavy weight. I am arranging for a new position for you. As what? Your prisoner's keeper? She shot back, a spark of her old fire returning. His expression was grim. The man who saw us last night, his name is Choi. He does not follow the old rules. He believes in making statements. Targeting your employment was a statement. The near loss of her life, as she knew it, was a move on his chessboard. She saw the flicker of something in his eyes, not guilt, but a cold, tactical fury. He had underestimated his rival's crassness. He had almost lost her, not to a bullet, but to the slow, grinding destruction of the world she had built for herself and her daughter. Later that day, she saw her chance to cross a line she could never uncross. Jae-hyun was in his study, the door slightly ajar. He was speaking on the phone in low, clipped tones, giving orders for a retaliation. It was going to be bloody, an eye for an eye, but on a scale that would leave bodies in the street. When he left the room, she saw a tablet left open on his desk, a map of a warehouse district displayed. A piece of idle gossip from one of her former clients, a wealthy shipping magnate's wife complaining about her husband's troubles, flashed in her mind. The woman had mentioned Choi's name, something about his real business, the one he kept hidden from his own people. A smuggling route that used refrigerated trucks from a specific fish market at a specific time. It was a vulnerability, a financial artery. She walked into the study. Jaehyun was pouring a drink, his back to her. "The warehouses are a distraction," she said, her voice calm. He turned, his eyes narrowing. "He moves his product through the Norwegian fish market. Refrigerated trucks, between 4 and 5 in the morning. He uses it to pay his foot soldiers off the books. If you hit him there, you don't just hurt him. You cut off his ability to pay the men who are loyal to him." She had done it. She had taken the chaos of his world and offered him a way to refine it, to make it more lethal, more precise. She had helped him sharpen the knife. He walked toward her, stopping so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He studied her face, searching for something. The violence in his eyes was still there, but it was now tempered with a raw, unsettling respect. "No one," he said, his voice a low growl, "has ever looked at my world and offered to help me aim." It was not a thank you. It was a confession, an acknowledgement that she was no longer just a witness. She was a participant. It was more intimate, more binding, than any declaration of love. The retaliation was surgical, just as she had predicted. There was no gang war, just a quiet, crippling financial blow that left Choi's organization reeling and his authority shattered. But Choi was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. The next move came not as a whisper, but as a scream. Imani's phone vibrated. A single image appeared on the screen. It was Brielle, playing on the swings at her school playground, her pink dress a bright splash of color. She was laughing, her head thrown back in joy. And around her head, a crudely drawn red circle. The threat was no longer about territory or money or power. It was about her daughter. The enemy had stopped targeting him. They were targeting her. A cold, diamond-hard fury replaced the fear in Imani's heart. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She didn't scream or cry. She looked closer at the photograph, her mind working with a terrifying clarity. Jaehyun, seeing the phone in her hand, was already reaching for his own, his face a thunderous mask of rage, ready to burn the city to the ground to find the man responsible. "Wait," she said, her voice sharp, stopping him cold. Her finger traced a shape on the screen. There. In the background of the photo, barely visible behind the trees of the playground, was the corner of a building. It had a distinctive blue tile pattern on its facade, a detail she recognized. It was the old Hanjin Textiles building, a derelict property she'd heard one of her former clients, a real estate developer, complaining about. He'd been trying to buy it for months, but the ownership was tied up in a web of shell corporations. A web he had mentioned was rumored to be controlled by Choi's faction. "The photo was taken from that building," she said, looking up at Jaehyun, her eyes blazing. "The Hanjin Textiles building on the corner of Siachodero. That's his nest." She hadn't just given him a target. She had given him the key. She was not a damsel to be rescued. She was the strategist who would guide his sword for the final, killing blow. He looked at her, a dawning understanding in his eyes. He wasn't just saving her daughter. They were saving her together. Jaehyun's response was not the explosive war he had first intended. It was silent, swift, and utterly devastating. Using the information Imani had given him, he didn't just send men to the building. He sent lawyers. He sent forensic accountants. He unraveled the entire network of shell corporations tied to that one property, exposing Choi's financial empire and cutting off his power at the source. The physical threat was neutralized almost as an afterthought, his rival's power base having crumbled to dust beneath him. Choi was removed not with a bang, but with the quiet, final click of a bank account being frozen. In the aftermath, the penthouse was silent. Brielle was asleep in a bedroom that now looked like a princess's storybook, safe and sound. But the cost of that safety was absolute. Imani's old life was gone, reduced to ash. She could never go back to being just a tutor, to the comforting anonymity of a normal life. She had seen the darkness underpinning the city, and worse, she had found she could navigate it. The price of her daughter's safety was her own innocence. Jaehyun stood by the window, looking out at the glittering city. He had paid a price, too. The solitude that had been his fortress for so long had been breached. He could no longer operate as a solitary predator. He had a family to protect. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. There were no apologies. Apologies were for men who had made mistakes. He had made a choice. My sister, he began, his voice rough, cutting through the silence. When she was taken from me, I swore I would build an empire so strong that nothing I cared for could ever be touched again. I built all of this to protect her memory. He took a step closer, his gaze intense, pinning her in place.
I was wrong, he said.
This is not an empire to protect a memory. It is a fortress to protect a future. He looked toward the hallway where Brielle slept, then back at Imani. Our future. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a proposal. It was a statement of fact. A declaration of a new reality that they now shared. Weeks passed. The city's pulse beat on, oblivious to the silent wars fought in its shadows. Imani stood at the vast dining table of the penthouse, no longer a guest but a resident. She wasn't wearing silk, but a soft, comfortable sweater, her hair tied back as she pointed to a character in Brielle's Korean workbook. This one means family, she said softly. Brielle carefully copied the character, her small tongue sticking out in concentration. The private elevator chimed, and Jaehyun entered. His suit jacket was off, his tie loosened at the collar. The warrior returning from the battlefield. He didn't speak, but his eyes found her across the expanse of the room. He walked past them, his hand brushing the back of Imani's chair in a gesture so fleeting it was almost imaginary, and went into the kitchen. The sound of a cabinet opening, the flow of water into a kettle, the click of the burner igniting.
They were normal sounds, domestic sounds.
Sounds that had no place in the world of a man like him. Yet here they were. Imani looked up from the workbook, her gaze meeting his over the kitchen island. He was watching her. She didn't smile. He didn't smile. There was no need. In the quiet space between them, a universe of understanding passed. They had chosen this dangerous, complicated, beautiful life, forged in fear and tempered by loyalty. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of the unspoken truth of what they had become, a family protected by a fortress of their own making.